always fun. There are two elements to incitement of insurrection. One is incitement, the other is insurrection. So incitement has a legal standard, so does insurrection. Neither of those standards are met. So if you're asking me, morally speaking, did Donald Trump do the right thing between November 4th and January 6th? I said, I will continue to say, no, he did not. I think he was saying things that are false. With just factually false about his theories with regard to the election, about the election being stolen, about fraud. This was all adjudicated in court. He did not even bring many of the claims that he's brought publicly and all the rest of that. If we're talking about incitement of insurrection as a legal standard, it doesn't meet any of those standards. When it comes to incitement, it has to be incitement to immediate lawless action. That's the standard for incitement. And I'm very meticulous in how I use this because I happen to speak publicly a lot, and that means there are lots of people who listen to me, which means some of those people are probably crazy. And some of them may go and do a crazy thing. Did I incite them? The media tend to use the word incitement very loosely with regard to this sort of stuff, in the same way that Bernie Sanders, quote unquote, incited the congressional baseball shooting. He did not. Bernie Sanders has a lot of things I disagree with. I think Bernie's a schmuck. Doesn't matter. He did not incite that. So saying bad things is not the same thing as inciting violence. Inciting violence, the legal standard in the United States is, I want you to go punch that guy in the face. That's inciting. With regard to insurrection, typically in insurrection, and there are some descriptions in case law, though none in statutory law, as far as I'm aware, the typical description in case law is the replacement of one legitimate government of the United States with another by violent means. The notion that Donald Trump coordinated any such insurrection is belied by the FBI itself. The FBI put out a report in, I believe it was August of 2021, suggesting that there was no well-coordinated insurrectionist attempt coordinated by the White House. In fact, what you had was Donald Trump thrashing around like that weird alien in the movie Life. I don't know if you ever saw it with Jake Gyllenhaal, where he's like kind of thrashing up against this glass box, just an alien just thrashing up against the glass box. That I think is more what you were seeing from November 4th to January 6th. And then, again, the claim that January 6th itself was an insurrection. So virtually, I'm not aware that anyone was charged with actual insurrection. There were some people who were charged with seditious conspiracy. There are insurrection statutes that do exist. No one was charged under those particular statutes. There were some people who you could say informally had insurrectionist ideas. Those would be the people who wanted to hang Nancy Pelosi or kill Mike Pence. And those people are in jail right now. And the election went forward. The election was certified. Mike Pence presided over the certification. Mitch McConnell presided over the certification. Joe Biden has been the president for the last 3 years. So Donald Trump, by the way, was still president at that point. If he had actively wanted to do what other people who have actually launched coups have done, he would have theoretically called the National Guard not to put down the riot, but to actually depose the sitting government of the United States in the name of a specious legal theory. He did not do that. He did not attempt that. Nobody working for him did that. The most you can say, I think, about what everybody was doing is that, and I want to say everybody. We can talk about Trump because this is really about Trump. He used a phrase that Trump was disseminating knowingly false information. The word that's carrying a lot of weight there is the word knowingly. So knowingly implies a knower. Do I think the information he was disseminating was false? Yes. Do I think that Donald Trump has a unique capacity to convince himself of nearly anything that is to his own benefit? Absolutely. And I think that that's actually what Donald Trump was doing there. And the evidence of that is Donald Trump being a human and all of us watching him for the last several years. So, the idea that he knew it to be false, I'm not even sure those standards apply in any, and just assessing him as a human, which is really what we're being asked to do because there's an intent element to this crime. Do you think that today Donald Trump knows that he lost the election?
Absolutely.
So I don't. Actually, I think.
But so I'm glad that you have the attorney background. When we are assessing mens rea, when we're looking at certain criminal statutes where intent is required, it's a reasonable person standard, right? Like, would a reasonable person have known that they were?
No, it depends on the mens rea standard. So it's not the same in every case. If you have to establish individual intent, then it's not enough to say a reasonable person should have known. That would be enough for a negligence statute. Usually, when you're talking about reasonable person statutes, just legally speaking, a reasonable person statute is, should a reasonable person have known? That's when you get to manslaughter. You can't do a reasonable person standard on first degree murder. So you have to establish actual motive in first degree murder.
But for first degree murder, you don't need the statement of I plan to kill this person or I intend to kill this person. We can prove that state of mind.
You need
circumstantial evidence.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. Sure. You could prove it.
So I feel like my feeling for Donald Trump was there were all these people around him that he trusted to investigate election fraud. He trusted Barr and the DOJ. He asked Pence, his vice president, to look into it. He asked his chief of staff. He asked his legal counsel. There's so many people that ostensibly he trusts them if he's asking them to look into it. And when all of them looked into it and reported back to him, no, we found nothing. Unless we're going to literally make the concession that Trump might actually be a delusional psycho man, At that point, should he not have realized, like, well, okay, maybe there's
Listen, I
something.
think he should have realized the day of the election that he lost the election, but that's not. But that's
Sure, but I'm
not
just
the
asking.
question.
I'm saying that, like, at that point, should he not have known that for him to go and propagate those claims that he'd asked all of the people he trusted to research, and then for him to take those claims to Michigan and to Georgia, and then publicly and to try to convince people to throw out the election, you don't think that?
But you're doing the same thing. You're reverting to, should a reasonable person have known? Yes, a reasonable person should have known. Did Donald Trump know? That's a different question. And so conflating those two questions is going to get you into some messy territory. By the way, this is why Jack Smith charged the way Jack Smith charged.
Yeah, which wasn't
Jack Smith did not charge conspiracy. Jack Smith did not charge insurrection. He did not charge seditious conspiracy, right? If the reason is because Jack Smith is a good lawyer. What he's doing is he's actually broadly, I would say pretty obviously, expanding statutory coverage in weird areas in order to cover a thing that doesn't quite fit into any of these legal categories. But the point that I'm making is that Jack Smith is on my side of this. He doesn't think that he can actually establish the intent necessary to convict under a seditious conspiracy or an insurrection.
I agree with that, right? But I think a lot of the underlying facts, though, because he does bring up those calls to Raffensperger in Georgia, he does bring up in the indictments that they were knowingly false information. So it seems like that's going to be part of the case, maybe not to convict on any of the 4 particular charges that he mentioned, but it seems like that's probably going to be part of what he's going to have to establish in court to convict Trump.
So I want to look at the actual text of the charges. So I'm sorry that I don't have them memorized. I believe one's a fraud charge that generally does not apply to cases like this. Generally, that fraud charge is like you're trying to steal money from the government.
Sure, fraud has been used pretty broadly in the past, though. It doesn't have to just be, because Smith has done oral arguments in response to a lot of the claims by Trump's lawyers. This was one of them. The infinite civil and criminal immunity was another one of them, where he cites past cases where these types of things, because I think it was to defraud of civil rights, I think was the 4th charge.
Right. So the defraud of civil rights is usually somebody standing in the actual like voting house door and preventing you from voting, not you have a specious legal theory that you espouse in court about whether those votes should be thrown out.
Sure. Although I don't like when we say specious legal theory and novel application, which I do agree some of these in some ways is novel. I don't think we've ever also had a president try to do this before. It is a novel situation where somebody has resisted the peaceful transfer of power this clearly in so many different ways.
Well, if you're talking about the legal cases, that's not true. But Gore sued in 2000. Right? I mean, so like if we're talking about the legal cases,
comparable to Gore, if this was comparable to Gore, then
I'm not saying it's comparable to Gore. I'm saying that if the idea is that espousing a legal theory in court amounts to de facto some form of election denial or interference in some way, that's not, as a general principle, it's over-inclusive.
Sure. Gore wasn't trying to decertify the vote, though, for states, right? They challenged their thing to the Supreme Court. They lost their case in the Supreme Court, and then power transfer happened.
Right. And Donald Trump had a bunch of legal challenges, and then he had a rally, and then there was a riot, and then he left power.
Yeah, but the Eastman theory of what Pence could do in Congress is a far cry away.
A truly shitty theory. I mean, make no mistake. It's
but not
really
just shitty. I think that if any Democrat had done this, I feel like we'd be looking at it in a far different lens. As in, we would be using terms like attempted coup, subversion of peaceful transfer of power. If a Democrat vice president had tried to essentially say that in Congress they could throw away the vote.
So I think what I want to get to here, actually, so we can be more specific, is why are these terms important? We agree on, largely speaking, what happened. I think the characterization of the term, we keep kind of bouncing around between two different categories, and I want to make sure
we can dump the legal stuff.
Okay, so we're just
not looking at